A millionaire lady never allowed anyone to sit with her at the dining table. Since the accident that took her husband and newborn baby, she had eaten every meal alone, guarding her silence like it was the only thing she had left of them. But tonight, something changed. A soft, polite voice whispered from beside her chair. "Can I sit with you, madam?" She froze. Her fork slipped from her fingers. The voice belonged to a black boy, 7 years old, shy eyes, small hands nervously twisting the hem of his shirt. The nanny's son, Jordan. Before she could speak, the maid rushed forward. "You shouldn't come here. Go on. This is dinner time." But Victoria lifted her hand, stopping her cold. Her eyes stayed locked on the little boy. For the first time in years, she didn't feel alone. Jordan hesitated, unsure if he had done something wrong. His small chest rose and fell with nervous breaths. I just thought maybe you'd like some company." Victoria blinked. Her heart thumped painfully in her chest. She hadn't spoken to anyone, had barely looked anyone in the eye for months, and yet here he was, small and unassuming, offering her something she hadn't realized she was craving: connection. "Sit," she whispered, almost inaudibly. Jordan's face lit up like a candle in the dark. He carefully climbed onto the chair beside hers, his legs dangling above the floor. He pulled his small backpack closer and placed his hands on the edge of the table, his posture nervous but hopeful. Victoria studied him quietly. The silence of the mansion seemed to soften around them, the usual echoes of emptiness now interrupted by the faint sound of a child's breath and the ticking of the antique clock on the far wall. "Are you hungry?" Jordan asked softly, glancing at the plate before her. Victoria shook her head. Not tonight." Jordan nodded as if he understood perfectly. Children always seem to understand things adults forgot. "Sometimes I'm not hungry either when Mama works late," he said. "But then when she comes home, it's better. Everything feels better." A lump formed in Victoria's throat. She pressed her fingers to her lips, struggling to hold back the first tears she had allowed herself in months. She had built walls around herself so high that no one, not maids, not staff, not friends, could reach her. And yet here he was, small and unassuming, tearing down one brick at a time without even realizing it. Jordan's mother, the nanny, Clara, hovered nervously near the doorway, her hand resting lightly on Jordan's shoulder. "Jordan, come on, honey. We shouldn't." Victoria lifted her hand again, firmer this time. Clara stopped mid-sentence, realizing she had been interrupted by a gesture too commanding to ignore. "Let him stay," Victoria said. Her voice was steady, though faintly shaky beneath the surface. He asked to sit. "Let him." Clara's eyes widened in surprise, then softened in understanding. She nodded and stepped back, giving the boy a small, approving smile. "All right, but just for tonight, Jordan." Jordan turned to Victoria, his wide eyes sparkling with cautious excitement. "Really?" "Yes," she whispered. He grinned faintly, the kind of small, imperfect smile that could light up a room. He pulled a cookie from his backpack, a tiny, round homemade one, and offered it. "Want some?" Victoria shook her head, but her lips twitched in the ghost of a smile. I don't usually eat with others," she admitted. "Neither do I," he said quietly. "But sometimes it's better." She didn't respond. She simply watched him, marveling at his innocence, the way he spoke with a confidence that wasn't arrogance but honesty. She noticed how the soft light from the chandelier played across his face, highlighting the small, determined crease in his brow, the dimple that appeared when he smiled faintly. For a moment, the mansion seemed to disappear. The cold marble floors, the heavy curtains, the portraits of ancestors who had never known grief, all of it faded into the background. There was only Jordan, sitting quietly beside her, patiently waiting for permission to share the space. He took a sip from his small juice pouch, then glanced at her again. "Do you like stories?" She froze. "Stories?" "Yes," he said, smiling softly. "I like to make up stories. About anything. About houses or magic or people who miss someone." Victoria's hands tightened around the edges of the table. The mention of missing someone, of grief, caught her off guard. Her voice cracked slightly when she finally spoke. "I used to like stories." Jordan leaned forward a little, lowering his voice conspiratorially. "Then let's make one tonight. Just for us. We can make up anything we want." She blinked, uncertain how to respond. But the offer hung in the air, gentle, unthreatening, innocent. She nodded ever so slightly. And so they began. Jordan's words tumbled out in a quiet rush. Little tales of adventures in enchanted forests, magical houses, and brave children who stood up to villains. Victoria listened, at first hesitantly, then with growing interest. She corrected a detail here, added a description there, finding herself lost in the act of creating, laughing quietly at one of the silly ideas. For the first time since the accident, she felt something she hadn't felt in years. Lightness. A small, fragile sensation, yes, but real. The mansion remained quiet beyond the dining room, but inside, a tiny world had been created. A world where grief could exist, but joy could also sneak in. Jordan paused mid-sentence and looked at her. "Do you want to tell one too?" She hesitated, swallowing the lump in her throat. The thought of opening herself up, of speaking aloud, and sharing a part of herself was terrifying, but his eyes were patient, trusting, waiting. Okay, she whispered finally. She spoke slowly at first, recounting a memory, a sunny day, a garden filled with flowers, a tiny hand reaching up to hers, a laugh that belonged to someone who would never come back. Her voice shook, but she continued, letting the story flow. Jordan listened attentively, nodding and asking questions, making it feel like the memory was alive again. When she finished, there was silence, but it was a warm, expectant silence, not heavy or oppressive. Jordan smiled and clapped his hands softly. "That was amazing. You're really good at this." Victoria laughed softly, a sound she hadn't heard in months, and felt tears prick her eyes. She quickly dabbed them away, embarrassed. I haven't done that in a long time. "You should do it more," Jordan said earnestly. "Stories are better when you share them." The connection was simple, pure and undeniable. That night, Victoria allowed herself to be seen, not as the grieving widow, not as the untouchable millionaire, but simply as someone who would feel, laugh, and participate in the world again. As they continued, Victoria noticed small, subtle gestures in Jordan. The way he brushed crumbs from his lap, how he made sure she had water, how he watched her reaction carefully, adjusting his tone, volume, and excitement to match her responses. Children were incredibly intuitive. They could sense when someone was fragile, when someone needed gentle encouragement rather than grand words. Victoria found herself softening more and more with each passing minute. She even let him lean slightly against her arm while recounting his stories. Each laugh, each imaginative twist, each carefully placed pause made her feel less alone, less haunted, less defined by the accident that had stolen her family. After a while, Jordan's mother, Clara, peeked back in. She didn't interrupt. She just watched from the doorway, seeing Victoria smile faintly, seeing her eyes glint with emotion once again. She felt relief. This rare, precious moment between child and employer was creating something beautiful. Jordan noticed her presence, but he didn't flinch. Instead, he waved faintly, a small gesture of politeness. Victoria acknowledged it with a nod, her voice quiet but warm. "Hello, Clara." Clara's lips curved in a subtle smile, eyes moist. She knew then that this child, this small innocent boy, had done something extraordinary tonight. He had cracked open a door in the heart of a woman who had closed herself off from life. Finally, the evening began to wind down. Jordan's plate had emptied, his backpack neatly placed beside him, and his stories had slowed to a calm, reflective pace. "Thank you," Victoria whispered, "for sitting with me." Jordan shrugged, modestly, almost embarrassed. "I like your stories too, and I think you like mine." Victoria smiled softly. "Yes, I do." Jordan grinned faintly, then looked toward the door where his mother stood. "I should go," he said reluctantly. "But tomorrow?" Victoria's lips curved naturally now, without effort. "Tomorrow," she promised, as they parted. Victoria remained at the table a little longer. The emptiness that usually consumed the mansion's dining room didn't feel so oppressive. It was as if the warm Jordan brought lingered in the air, wrapping the space with a fragile but undeniable sense of life. For the first time in months, she allowed herself to imagine the possibility of companionship. A child's small act of courage had reminded her that life, even in its quietest moments, could still surprise her with warmth. And in that quiet, golden-lit room, beneath the glimmer of crystal chandeliers, Victoria realized, for the first time, she didn't have to be alone. The morning sunlight filtered through the tall, arched windows of the mansion, casting golden streaks across the polished marble floor of the dining hall. It was quieter than usual, but not in the oppressive way it had been for years. This quiet carried a promise, soft, subtle, yet unmistakable. Victoria sat at her usual place at the dining table, her posture stiff at first, but her mind was strangely lighter. The events of the previous evening had left a mark, a shift that she could not yet fully name, but it felt like the first flicker of hope. Jordan, the nanny's young son, approached cautiously, his small sneakers making soft tapping sounds against the marble. He paused at the doorway, his eyes widening when he saw Victoria seated at the table. "Good morning, madam," he whispered politely. His voice was still tentative, but there was a brightness to it, a quiet courage that had not been there before. Victoria's lips curved into a small smile. "Good morning, Jordan," she said softly. Her voice carried warmth, a subtle contrast to the measured, cold tone she had maintained for months. Jordan stepped closer, his small hands twisting the straps of his backpack nervously. Victoria gestured toward the empty chair beside her. "Sit," she said gently. Jordan froze for a moment, unsure she truly meant it. Then, with a careful, almost hesitant motion, he climbed onto the chair, swinging his legs to avoid touching the floor. Victoria watched him, a soft ache of familiarity and something she had not felt in years, connection, welling up inside her. For a few minutes, they ate in silence. The clinking of silverware against fine china and the soft rustle of the curtains in the morning breeze were the only sounds. Yet, even this silence felt alive, filled with the potential of new beginnings. Jordan broke the quiet first, glancing up at Victoria with his wide, curious eyes. "Madam," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "can you tell me a story?" Victoria looked at him, surprised at the request. Her lips curved into a faint smile. "Of course," she said. "I have a story, but you must promise to listen carefully." Jordan nodded eagerly, leaning forward, his elbows resting on the polished table. Victoria began to tell him the story of a tiny explorer who discovered a hidden garden in a mansion that looked much like her own. She described the winding paths, the fragrant flowers, the secret treehouse, and the sparkling stream. Jordan's eyes grew wider with every detail, and for the first time in years, Victoria felt the warmth of life returning to her own chest. She laughed softly at his animated reactions, and the sound surprised her. It was real, unguarded. Jordan giggled in return, his laughter clear and unrestrained, bouncing off the high ceilings and echoing lightly across the marble floors. The sound lingered, fragile but powerful, like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Clara, the nanny, appeared quietly at the doorway, watching the scene unfold. Her eyes glistened with unshed tears. She didn't interrupt or speak. She simply observed. She knew this small child, this 7-year-old boy, was bridging a gap that no one else had been able to touch. He was bringing warmth back into the mansion and into Victoria's heart. Over the next few days, this became their routine. Every morning, Jordan quietly joined Victoria at the table, and slowly, conversation replaced silence. Laughter became more frequent, and Victoria began to notice the little details she had ignored for months. The way the sunlight painted golden streaks across the floor, the faint scent of lavender from the hallway, the rustle of leaves outside the window. She began to smile more naturally, sometimes catching herself mid-thought with a gentle chuckle. Yet Victoria knew that this change could not remain confined to the dining hall. There were rooms in the mansion that she had avoided for months, reminders of her loss. The nursery, the bedroom, the study, they all bore the weight of grief, the echoes of a family she had lost. She had avoided them, terrified of the emotions they might trigger. But Jordan's presence gave her courage. Perhaps it was time to confront the past, not to erase it, but to acknowledge it, to honor it, and to begin healing. One afternoon, Victoria invited Jordan to explore a part of the mansion that had been off-limits. His eyes widened in surprise and excitement. "Really?" he whispered. "Yes," she replied with a small, tentative smile. "I want to show you the place where I used to spend time with my family. You'll like it, I promise." Jordan followed her carefully as they navigated the long, dimly lit corridors, past the portraits of stern ancestors whose eyes had once seemed so cold and judging. Today, those faces seemed softened, their gaze was less intimidating under the gentle afternoon sunlight streaming through the windows. Victoria stopped before a door she hadn't opened in months, the nursery. Her hand hovered over the knob, hesitating. The scent of lavender drifted faintly through the room, mingling with the golden light pouring from the windows. Toys lay scattered neatly, evidence of laughter that had once filled this space. Jordan looked around in awe. "It's beautiful," he whispered, almost reverently. Victoria swallowed hard, her voice catching as she spoke. "It used to be my baby's room," she said softly. "I haven't been in here since." Her voice trailed off, but the meaning was clear. Jordan stepped closer, reaching for her hand. "It's okay, madam," he said gently. "We can sit here. You're not alone anymore." Her eyes filled with tears, and for the first time, Victoria allowed herself to sit on the floor, her knees drawn up to her chest. Jordan curled up beside her, his small frame offering warmth and a silent shield. She cried freely, releasing the grief she had held for months, allowing herself to feel sorrow and loss without restraint. Jordan didn't flinch. He simply sat with her, letting her lean on him, offering his quiet presence as comfort. Over the following weeks, Victoria allowed herself to engage more with life. She began taking walks in gardens, sometimes with Jordan at her side, sometimes alone, letting the sunlight wash over her. She began to speak to the staff openly, acknowledging them, smiling at them, noticing them. The mansion no longer felt like a mausoleum of memories. It had begun to breathe again, infused with the warmth of human presence. One morning, Victoria and Jordan sat together at the dining table, sunlight streaming through the tall windows, casting golden patterns on the marble floor. Jordan looked up at her, eyes bright, cheeks flushed with excitement. "Madam, can we do this every day?" he asked, his voice filled with hope. Victoria smiled warmly. "Yes, Jordan, we can," he grinned, and in that simple expression, Victoria saw something extraordinary, a bridge between the pain of the past and the possibilities of the future. Life, despite its losses, could offer unexpected gifts. A child's simple act of courage, a gentle voice seeking connection, could pierce even the deepest sorrow. The mansion slowly transformed. Laughter became common, soft and bright, echoing off the high ceilings. Victoria engaged in activities she had long abandoned, reading stories aloud, tending the gardens, even painting small canvases with Jordan by her side. She felt the warmth of companionship, the joy of sharing moments, and a profound comfort being seen and acknowledged. Her grief never vanished entirely. It never would, but it softened. It became manageable, reshaped by the presence of someone who reminded her she could still care, still feel, still live. Jordan's laughter, his innocent curiosity, became a balm to her heart, a daily reminder that life continued, that it could still hold joy. One evening, as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink, Victoria watched Jordan play in the garden. He ran freely, laughing, the sound carried by the gentle breeze. She felt an unfamiliar lightness in her chest, a freedom from the shadow of loss that had clung to her for so long. Jordan ran toward her, breathless with excitement. "Madam, look, I found a hidden garden like the one in your story." Victoria smiled, kneeling to join him, letting him take her hand as they explored the patch of flowers and shrubs. The warmth of his hand in hers, the light in his eyes, reminded her that life could be beautiful again. At the end of the day, they returned to the mansion, walking side by side through the grand halls. Victoria glanced at Jordan, now asleep, her arms after a day filled with play and laughter, and felt a surge of emotion, gratitude, love, and hope. She realized that the mansion, once a silent monument to loss, was alive again, filled with warmth, laughter, and connection. Sitting in the quiet of the night, Victoria reflected on the journey that had brought her here. The tragedy that had once seemed insurmountable no longer defined her. A child's courage, a gentle presence, and the willingness to open her heart had reshaped her world. She understood now that healing was not about forgetting, but about embracing the possibilities life still offered. As she laid Jordan down in the guest room, tucking him in carefully, she whispered softly, "Thank you for being here, Jordan. You've reminded me how to live again." Jordan's small hand reached up, holding hers for a moment before he drifted into sleep. Victoria watched him for a long while, feeling a sense of peace she hadn't known in years. The mansion, once echoing with emptiness, now carried the quiet hum of life. And within that hum, a bond had formed, delicate, strong, and full of promise. Victoria closed the door gently, her heart lighter than it had been in years. She walked through the halls, past the portraits, the polished marble, the grand staircase, and finally paused in the dining hall. The sunlight still painted golden streaks across the floor, and she realized that she could finally face the future, not with fear, but with hope. The mansion was no longer a house of sorrow. It was a home, and in its walls, laughter, connection, and the gentle pulse of life had returned. Victoria knew that the journey was far from over, but for the first time in years, she felt something extraordinary, the possibility of joy, of companionship, of love. And it all began with the soft, polite voice of a 7-year-old boy, brave enough to ask, "Can I sit with you, madam?" In that moment, Victoria understood that life, even after unimaginable loss, could still offer new beginnings. And sometimes all it took was a small act of courage, a gentle presence, and the willingness to open one's heart. The mansion, once a silent witness to grief, now echoed with hope, and Victoria, with Jordan by her side, was finally ready to embrace it.